Welcome to the Booktopia podcast. I'm Joel, and I'm here with journalist and author Bridie Jabour to talk about her book, Trivial Grievances. Thanks for joining us, Bridie.
My pleasure.
It's great to have you. I just finished the book last night, and I loved it.
Well, that's a relief.
I do feel like you got a direct line into my brain a little bit.
Oh, really? That's what I was going for. Well, that's the hard thing when you're writing something so it's pretty personal in some ways. Like there's a bit of memoir in there, although obviously I interview people as well. And then you get to the end and hand it in and just think, is that incredibly self-indulgent? And I've just written like 70,000 words just about how I feel, and why would anyone care about that? So what a relief to hear that you got something out of it.
It's the honesty, right? You are so honest about it that it feels like it cuts through to that part that's just true. That's what I think really good memoir does, or whatever this book is. So tell us a bit about the book so that people will understand.
It's a funny little hybrid, isn't it? There is memoir in it, and I think that memoir at any age can be so interesting. So I wasn't really bashful about writing that, but it is in essay form. There's also a bit of journalism in there as well. So it's a mix of those three things basically. And the center of it, it's about millennial malaise and millennials basically getting to their 30s and realizing that life isn't working out the way that they thought. But I think that it does, as I worked on the book, that's how it was originally pitched and that's how I started writing it. But I think within the first couple of essays, I got to a point thinking and knowing and realizing this isn't just about millennial malaise, and this isn't just something that happens to people in their early 30s, although it is very common for that age. But you know, it's quite universal. It's about existential crisis basically, and looking around your life and thinking, is this it? Is this what I'm happy with? And how to find joy in that ordinary life as well, and come to terms with not being a famous rock star. That is part of it too.
Absolutely. So this came off the back of a viral article you wrote. Can you tell us about how you progressed from that article to the book?
That article was such a funny thing. I'm the opinion editor at The Guardian, and I also do a bit of writing. And I was 31 and I'd had this dinner with some mates and realized that everyone suddenly seemed quite miserable. And I was definitely feeling it a bit myself as well. You know, have I made the right decisions? This is my job. It's going to be hard to change it. This is where I live. It's getting harder to change cities. You know, your roots are being put down. These are my kids. Definitely can't change them. Well, I only had one at the time. And, you know, I was looking around saying, so this is the shape of my life. Is this it? Am I happy with this? And have I made the right decisions? And I realized that a lot of other people were asking the same questions, that it was not unique to me. And it was not unique to women, certainly. It was men, women, people of different cultural backgrounds, people, you know, my mates who lived overseas as well as my mates who lived in Australia. I could see a lot of people going through this same kind of melancholy almost. And because it was December, there's not that much news around. So that's a time when I traditionally run lighter stuff and more think pieces and just stuff about life. That's what people want to read. So I wrote it, ran it past another editor because I can't just commission myself, and they okayed it and said, yeah, it's a great idea. We should publish this. And so I actually published it on New Year's Eve, which is a very quiet time, and like a week between Christmas and New Year's where you're just putting up a couple of things a day. So I wasn't expecting it to go that big. And I also published it just as the bushfires were happening in Australia. So it was actually a very, very intense news time in Australia. So I just thought, you know, there's the nice life thing for this morning on New Year's Day or New Year's Eve, whatever. Move on to my other more important pieces about climate change and bushfires, and we're watching everything burn down in Australia. The piece went insane. It was 600,000 clicks and it went around the world. I still get emails about that piece. I got Twitter DMs about it. People found me on Instagram. People emailed me. Loads and loads of people in their 30s emailed me, but I also had a lot of older people emailing me saying this is exactly how my child feels. And, you know, I have a 30-year-old and they're going through this. Or there was one woman who said, I have 3 kids in their late 20s and early 30s. You've completely nailed how they're feeling. And I actually feel really sorry for them because I think that it's harder for them than it was for me. And this isn't a usual reaction to an opinion piece. Like I knew there was something there, and so I started thinking about a book, and developed a pitch. And it wasn't a very long pitch, and sent it around and got picked up very quickly. And then I thought, it's 2020. Oh, it's February. The bushfires are over. I'm glad that really intense time of my life is over. Time to take the rest of this quiet year to write a book.
I'm pretty sure that's how a lot of us felt at the beginning of that year.
Yeah, and the sky cleared in February, and we all had that sigh of relief. Things are only going to get better from here.
Absolutely, yeah. That's really interesting. So it really was just very you concentrated it into a book pitch and sent it around. That's cool. So I guess it's a very varied series of essays in a lot of ways, even though it's built around this central concept. Is there any sort of central thing you want people to take away from it when they're finished?
The central thing I would like them to take away is that they are not alone, and they are not abnormal for going through times in their life where they may not be as happy as they thought they would, and that it's very natural and appropriate thing to wonder if you've made the right decisions and if this is the life that you want. And I also want them to take away how much joy there is in an ordinary life, and how lucky we all really are to be here in general. And I hope that this book can help them see that as well.
I definitely think you've communicated that. I kept repeating lines of it to my partner and asking her to validate my own feelings about it that were similar. But one of the early quotes that I pulled out was that sense of what did you say? I've been experiencing a certain kind of tedium for a little while. I thought my dissatisfaction was perhaps a symptom of my brattiness. There had been no parties in my honour lately, no announcements to make, with a satisfied air of self-deprecation, some personal news. Intellectually, I knew I was not special, but in my heart, I still loved the applause. That's such a great. I think it really captures something that a lot of people who are around. I'm older than you, but around about our age feel as they get to that point where they've done the things.
Exactly. And we do feel special. And I'm glad that you like that line, because I would still cringe a little bit at it in edits, and that is a line that I was proud of. But I also just thought, God, I'm really being honest here, aren't I? Because we're not meant to admit to feeling so special. But I think that we all do deep down. Most of us feel special, and we keep feeling special into our 30s and 40s and probably 50s. We are the protagonist of our own lives, so everything that happens is happening to us, as long as you obviously don't let that veer into narcissism. But I'm glad that you related to the line, and I think that it's good to admit it, and I'm glad that other people can see themselves in that as well, and it's not just me thinking that I'm the center of the universe.
Well, it just goes to show that people are, I think that there is a status obsession that there is a way to shake off, but if you let it set in. I think around your early 30s is probably when it starts to set in, and if you don't shake it off, then you can get really obsessed with it, I think.
Yeah, and also the thing about that as well is that if you do get the status, and I've had it a few times, you get there and realize it doesn't actually make your life better, and it doesn't actually make you happier. When you have these big external achievements, you think they're going to make you feel differently about yourself, but they don't, because they're not actually the things that matter. And I think that that's another daunting realization to have in an existential crisis as well.
Absolutely. You have had quite a few, I guess, life-changing moments in that have sort of solidified your feeling like you're alive, I guess. In the book you talk about your son having this seizure, which just sounded utterly terrifying. Thankfully, I haven't been in that situation with my kids, but I very viscerally felt it. And I feel like it is a real wake-up call to take things a bit different differently and seriously, but only for a little while, right?
Exactly. So that is still the worst moment of my life, that seizure. And I do feel fundamentally changed. So when he had that seizure, I write about it in the book, but I honestly thought that he was dying, that I was watching my child die. And he was about 14 or 16 months old then. And he was turning blue in front of me. We didn't know why he was having the seizure. It ended up being completely fine. In the ambulance on the way to the hospital, like he triple O talked me through it. The seizure stopped. It was just because of a spike in his fever. And the ambos told me on the ride to the hospital that it's a pretty normal thing, but that when they get called out to it, they have to sometimes treat the parents and sedate the parents before they actually treat the kid because of how scary it is to watch. And I do think that moment, it did fundamentally change me in a way. It made me realize something that I've never been able to shake since, and that is that, like, my son is mortal. I honestly had not properly reckoned with that before, and it changed me in the long term. But also, you get this huge high afterwards as well, like this euphoria where nothing can bother you, and you're just so happy to be alive, and the sky is so blue, and the traffic is slow. But who cares? It's traffic. We're here. We're alive. And I do try to take that into my life, because it wears off after a couple of weeks, and I do try to remember those feelings and hang on to it a little bit. And then I had another one earlier this year when I was in quite a serious car accident with both of my kids, where we got hit by a truck and the car rolled 3 times on the highway, and I was completely conscious for the whole thing and knew what was happening at the time. It was utterly terrifying, and the car accident was so bad that they called out a helicopter because they thought for sure there had to be fatalities, and there wasn't. We all walked away. But I got told a lot by the paramedics and the nurses and doctors how lucky we were. And I got told explicitly by a couple of doctors that all of us, or at least one of us, should or could be dead. Honestly, the one of us thing is more terrifying to me when you start thinking about that, which one. And so that, I was very changed after that as well. And that was only a few months ago. So I feel like this happens probably to every parent, though. You have these moments of complete and sheer terror every few years. If you're lucky, it's only every few years where your world gets turned upside down for a little bit, and then life goes on, and you have to try and hang on to the small lessons that you learn out of that. And after the car accident, I did actually have the funny thought. I was in baby ICU, which is not a fun place to be. Obviously, my baby was fine, but he was in for observation. And I was lying down. My shoulder was broken. I didn't know it was broken, though. It took a while to get diagnosed because it was such a unique break. Lying next to him, my sleeping child in baby ICU, and I was thinking, my book's right. I was writing my book. I truly did think that. I'm like, it's really wanky, but I was like, my book is about what is important in life. And I think I did nail in the book by the end what is important in life. And it was very much reaffirmed by my near-death experience.
Yeah. I think when I first met you a couple of months ago, I was complaining about my having snapped a tendon in my little finger, and I was like, "Oh, it's really hard." And I went to shake your hand to say hello, and you were like, "Oh, you can't," because I just was in a rollover.
Yeah, I just almost died. But even at that point, my shoulder was sore. It still hadn't been diagnosed as broken. So does that one up a broken finger, broken shoulder versus broken finger?
It was a definite one up, but yeah, I definitely empathize with that feeling though, even without having had obviously that experience, but also just that feeling of like that sense of I think I was keenly aware of my children's mortality from the moment they were born. I was that parent who would like go into my son's crib and poke him to make him wake up so that I could hear him breathing, because sometimes it's very hard to tell.
Yes, we've all been there. And when they sleep in for the first time or through for the first time, and you like jump out of bed frantic, are they still breathing? What's going on?
Yeah. And I think when you come from a big family, which I do, and you do, I gather from the book, that just no sympathy from your parents about that type of thing, because they're just like, they're fine.
Oh yeah. And my mother is also, you come from a big family, so there's little sympathy. And on top of that, my mother is a nurse. Now, any child of a nurse knows there is no sympathy for any illness. You are never taken to hospital unless they can see bone or you're not breathing. And when we went to hospital with a seizure, my mum was actually terrified when I rang her to tell her about it. But then the next day when I was still upset, mum goes to me, "That's not the last time you'll be at the hospital with your kid." And I was like, could you be a bit more comfortable? She was right. Like, it's true. But yeah, you don't get reservoirs of sympathy when they've got so many other kids to think of as well.
Absolutely. Which brings me to one of the parts of the book that I really loved, and I haven't ever read anywhere else expressed in the way that you did, about siblings. You talk about, well, I'll let you talk about it because it's more interesting from you. The sibling love.
I'm so, a few people have read this book and pointed out a few different essays to me, and none of them have spoken about that one. And it's one of my favorite ones. So I'm glad that you could connect with it. And maybe it's people from big families who do. So the central premise of it, it's something that I've actually been thinking about for a couple of years, is does parenting matter when you have siblings? And, we are told over and over again, especially in modern parenting life, how influential we are on our kids, and what to do to make your kids empathetic, and what to do to make your kids this way or that way, and how to teach them how to be humans, basically, which, obviously you do have to do as a parent. But, growing up, my parents, who are great parents, are very, very much background characters in my life and in my memories. Like, everything was about me, my brother, and my sisters. My parents fade into the background. We were very unsupervised too, because this is growing up in the country in the 90s. But, I think that my relationships with my siblings have shaped me so much and shaped my character. And some in really, really obvious ways. I'm such a typical oldest child. Look at me releasing my second book after having my second kid and having this great job at the Guardian. I've always been someone who's quite organized, ambitious. I can get stuff done. And that's typical oldest child stuff. But even small things like my sense of humor, I think, comes from my siblings. And certainly the way that I respond to conflict comes from everything I learned in the numerous conflicts I had with my siblings. Although I don't physically fight anyone the way that I physically fought my siblings. And when I started researching it, so I had this as a hunch, and this is how I feel. And, I think there's a good essay in that. But when I started researching it, the studies in it I thought were really, really interesting. It's a very, very understudied area. But the research that is there completely backed up my feelings, which is that your siblings are a huge influence on your life and can sometimes be, well, it's very under researched, but I think can sometimes be more influential than your parents. And the studies bear that out in the few studies that there are.
Yeah, I found that really fascinating. I've got 3 younger brothers, so definitely understand the older sibling feeling that comes from just bossing people around all day.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just used to. I have no problems bossing anyone around.
Very comfortable authority with people. But yeah, that really rang true for me. It's not that obviously my parents are massively important to my life and the way they treated me growing up, but yeah, I think it's underestimated, and I hadn't really thought about it in that way before. But so much of your sort of, I guess you'd say, building blocks in some ways come from parents in certain ways, like the decisions they make, very fundamental decisions that they make about where you're going to live and stuff. But this sort of day-to-day personality, the way I interact with other human beings. And, I definitely think that my siblings have had more of an influence on me in that.
Yeah.
My parents.
And your sense of self and who you are in the world and how you treat other people. Like, some of the studies bore this out, and I also agree, like, makes you a very empathetic person. I think particularly when you're from a big family as well, because as you would know, I'm the oldest of 4, and we're all born within 6 years. So we're quite close in age. Could not be more different to each other, personality wise. And when you're doing that, like living side by side, so physically close to each other all of the time, and with people who are so fundamentally different to you in some ways, it's really freaking good for you. And I think it's and very good for your sense of self, and very good for how you treat people as you get older. And we're still very, very close. Obviously in my 30s now, we're still very close. But I think even if you're not close to your siblings when you're an adult, it still doesn't take away all the growing up you did side by side. And a really interesting point as well is your siblings is probably the longest relationship you're ever going to have in your life. Your parents are going to die, unfortunately. Mine won't, yours will. But your parents are going to die, your partner you meet, usually you've already lived for like at least a couple of decades before you've met them, but your siblings in general are going to see you through from very close to the beginning to very close to the end. And that's another, I think, very fascinating thing to grapple with as well. You can't hide yourself from them. No way.
No. And I also think they provide a sort of safe space as a child to make really bad mistakes, which
exactly.
I reflect often upon the things that I did, especially as the eldest, to my siblings that I deeply regret and have feelings about, and it informs the way I behave as an adult. And I've talked to them about it and sometimes apologized to them about things that I've remembered. And in almost every case, they don't remember the things that I remember. They remember different things that I did to them.
Exactly. I know my younger sister will say stuff that I did to her, allegedly. I've got no recollection of it at all. And then, and also, that's another interesting thing that you learn by having siblings. The way that we remember certain events, the exact same event, and we can remember it in such different ways. That is such a valuable thing to have, to realize quite early in your life, that people are going to see things differently to you and remember things differently to you. But yeah, you're right. The space, like all the most awful things I've ever done in my life has definitely been to my siblings, and I'm sorry.
Yeah, so make sure you have lots of kids so that they can treat each other terribly.
Yeah. And not blame you, but also you don't blame your parents, you blame your siblings.
Yeah, it's true. Another thing in the book that I really loved, the way you covered, this is a complete pivot, is your sort of common sense response to the moral panic over the internet and phones and social media. I'm a big phone user. I love my social media, but as someone I'm in my late 30s, I do get this pushback from everyone around me all the time about how it's just, it's really unhealthy, and like as if there's something really fundamentally wrong with me for caring about.
Yeah, I'm so sick of all the articles and all the panic about the internet making us worse people and how bad it is for society. I just don't buy into it. I think we should be careful of it. We should be very thoughtful about it, and it's good to have discussions about it. But almost all the ways that I see it covered is negatively. And there's loads of positives to the internet and phones and social media. And yeah, I think it goes under-recognized. And that essay was in response to, I was sick of reading about the moral panic. I was sick of another thing to feel guilty about, my screen time. And so in response, I wrote that essay. I like being addicted to my phone. And I do.
Yeah, that definitely made sense to me. I think there's just so much in this book that people can take away from. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you really would like to talk about? Is there a question I haven't asked you?
No, you talked about my favorite things. The sibling. Yeah, you're a great interviewer. It's probably because you're the oldest child.
I'm not a professional interviewer, but I do love doing this. This is my favorite part of my job. So thank you so much for joining us. It was great to talk to you, and I really want people to go out and buy the book, regardless of whether you're a millennial or not. I think you're going to get a lot out of it. It's just a fascinating sort of glimpse into all the many sort of modern day concerns that you definitely thought about, but not as much as Bridie has.
And also, people should definitely buy it because it's been released in lockdown, and I'm pretty devastated about that.
Yeah. So you can buy Trivial Grievances from Booktopia.com.au. Thanks for joining us, Bridie.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Booktopia podcast channel. Don't forget, you can subscribe to us on SoundCloud and iTunes for free and get access to hundreds of author discussions, book analysis pieces, and more. Or, if your eyes need a workout, head to Booktopia TV on YouTube. Don't forget, for all books featured in this podcast and for access to a whole bunch of other fun content on our blog, head to Booktopia, Australia's local bookstore, at booktopia.com.au.